If you're like me, then you realize that we're less than a month away from Nona the Ninth, and that's really exciting. But that also means that we're less than a month away from Nona the Ninth, and a lot happened in the previous 2 books. So, that presents kind of a problem because everything that happened in Gideon and Harrow could be potentially important for Nona, and you don't really want to forget anything. Before Harrow came out, Tor did an entire chapter-by-chapter breakdown of Gideon the Ninth, and it was incredibly helpful for remembering what had happened previously, but it doesn't look like they're going to be doing the same thing for Harrow this time around. So that leaves you with 2 options. Number 1, you could reread both books in their entirety, which I recommend, but that's rereading 2 whole books, and some of us don't have the time for that. So in that case, you could read or watch some sort of recap for the previous 2 books. When Mike's Mike released his amazing 3-part Pretty Little Liars recap, I wondered to myself if I knew anything well enough or convoluted enough that I could do some sort of breakdown like that. And then I realized I did, and it was called the Locked Tomb series. So here we are. And by the way, Tor, if you want to send me an arc of Nona or an arc of Electo when those are available for all the work I'm about to put in here, DM me on Twitter. It doesn't really matter if we're less than a month away. I really would like an arc. So a few guidelines before we jump in. Number 1, I'm going to spoil the entirety of Gideon the Ninth, Harrow the Ninth, and As Yet Unsent, which is the bonus chapter content novella that was released with the Harrow the Ninth paperback. I'm not going to talk about any of the things for Nona that have already been released or leaked. So if you want to go into Nona completely unaware, this video is safe for you. Number 2, I'm not going to be doing a chapter-by-chapter breakdown. This is because I don't want to make a long video for the sake of making a long video. If I wanted to do a chapter-by-chapter recap of both books, this video would probably end up being 4 hours. And look, the camera is a rental, and I don't know how to edit a video together. I'm going to have to watch tutorials on how to do that as soon as I'm done filming. So I want to make this as easy on me as possible. And then also, I want this video to be helpful in some way. And I do think a chapter-by-chapter breakdown where I just bombard you with information isn't the most helpful thing in the world. Number 3, if you're here because you like watching long video essays, or this got recommended to you, or you know me in real life and you're like, oh my god, what is she doing in my recommended, or you know about Gideon and Harrow from Twitter, and you want to know what's going on, first of all, hi. It's pretty cool that you're here. I do need to give you some content warnings for this series, and I'm going to put them on the screen right now. And I'm going to hold for a second. So be aware of those. So the way I want to break this down are the characters, the timeline, and then 4 mysteries that are present in this book. Every time that some sort of major plot point or revelation or just something about the mystery comes up, I'm going to add a little note next to it to kind of keep it in play and in your minds. The 4 mysteries are Lictorhood, the Murders, the Locked Tomb, and Gideon. I'm going to start with a quick vocab / world building lesson before we jump into the characters, so that way I don't have to do all of this later and I can just talk through the plot. When I get to Harrow, we're going to do this again with any sort of new vocab and also new characters. So again, we're just doing this now so I don't have to do it later. So number 1, the 9 houses. They all orbit a sun called Dominicus. They are a solar system, and when I say house, it's kind of interchangeable for planet. A necromancer is a type of magician that deals with life and death. So each of the 9 houses has their own necromantic specialty. For example, the 5th house is talented with spirit magic, and the 9th house does bones. Cavaliers are the sworn swordsmen of necromancers. So each of the houses has a necromantic heir, aka the person who's next in line to lead the house, and each of those necromantic heirs and the leaders of the houses themselves have cavaliers. Cavaliers are required to fight with a rapier and some sort of offhand. A rapier, by the way, is a lightweight sword that kind of looks like a fencing foil. Lictors are gods, super powerful, immortal necromancers. They're members of the first house. Finally, we have Thalergy and Thenergy. Thalergy is life energy, Thanergy is death energy. Every human being has like both of them. So like life energy is kind of like a, okay, I get it for people, but like when your cells die, they produce the energy. So with all the vocab out of the way, let's just do a house and character recap. Starting over here, we have the first house, which isn't really relevant in this book, but is super relevant in Harrow. In the first house, we have teacher and the other canon house priests. The second house is the military strength of the emperor. They tend to take like a lot of leadership and strategic positions. They're led by Judith Duertos, the necromancer, and Marta Dias, the cavalier. You need to know before we go any further that I love the third house. Every test I've ever taken to be put into one of the 9 houses has put me in the third house, and I'm tragically an Ianthe apologist, so we just need to get that out of the way. The third house are like super rich show-offs. They are led by necromancers Coronabeth Tridentarius and Ianthe Tridentarius, who are twins, and then their cavalier is Naberius Babs' turn. Babs sucks. I hate Babs. The fourth house is also part of the military for the emperor, except they're known for being more reckless and impulsive, and that makes perfect sense because in this book they're represented by teenagers. We have necromancer Isaac Titares and also cavalier Jean-Marie Schoder. The fifth house specializes in spirit magic, so they deal with ghosts, and in this book they're represented by Abigail Pent, the necromancer, and Magnus Quinn, her cavalier. They're married, which is like super taboo among all of the houses, but they're married, and Magnus is the ultimate wife guy, and he makes puns, so I love Magnus inherently. The sixth house are librarians, essentially, and they are represented by Palamedes Sextus and his beloved cavalier Camilla Hecht, who we're all in love with Camilla Hecht. If you're watching this and you're like, I actually don't care about Camilla that much, I don't know why you're watching this video, and I don't know why you're reading these books. The seventh house is obsessed with arts and beauty, and they're led by necromancer Dulcinea Septimus and cavalier Protesalius Abdoma. I hate the eighth house. Like, they're boring, and I'm going to talk about the eighth house as little as possible, which sadly in this book I have to talk about them a lot. These guys are religious zealots, and they specialize in like breeding human batteries to be siphoned, which we're going to go over later. Just know that in this book you're going to have to deal with them, and their names are Silas Octokisarin and Colum Asht. That's the necromancer and the cavalier. And finally, we have the ninth house. They specialize in bone magic. They are led by necromancer and reverend daughter Hera Nona Gizimus and her cavalier Ortis Ninjanath. And an important character for this book is Gideon Nav, who is an indentured servant to the ninth house. 10,000 years ago, Dominicus, the star that all 9 houses rotate around, and all 9 houses died. And the emperor resurrected all of them and gave them necromancy. 19 years before the first book, a woman fell out of the sky above the ninth house. She was dead on arrival, but there was a baby with her that had been receiving her life support and was still alive. The nuns of the ninth house managed to contain her spirit long enough for her to speak, and she yelled one thing: Gideon, Gideon, Gideon. And so the ninth house nuns named this baby Gideon, and throughout her childhood she would go and visit the skeleton of her mother. 17 years before the start of the series, every child in the ninth house below the age of 18 died at the same time. But Gideon was the only survivor. Shortly after, Harrow Nona Gizimus was born. At the start of the series, Gideon is trying to escape the ninth house. Like, she's done this a million times in the past and has been thwarted every single time, but she is finally feeling confident because this time she's forcing Harrowhark's hand. If Harrowhark doesn't let her go, she's going to tell everybody that Harrow's parents died 7 years ago and that Harrow has been keeping it a secret from everybody by puppeting their bodies. Gideon and Harrow, hate each other, but they're also, obsessed with each other. And everyone who, has read this book, really zooms in on the fact that they are super, super obsessed with each other. You know, like gal pals. Harrow's actually received a letter from the first house, and she wants Gideon to go to Bone Church so that she can hear her read it to everybody in the ninth house. And Gideon, doesn't want to go to Bone Church, which is super fair, but Harrow really, really wants her there. So Harrow makes her a deal. They're going to duel, and if Gideon wins the duel, she can just stay put, doesn't have to go to church or anything, and can just wait for the space shuttle that's coming to pick her up. But if Harrow wins, Gideon has to go to Bone Church, but Harrow's going to make the space shuttle wait so that Gideon can get on it after Bone Church. So Gideon, being super jacked and great with a two-handed sword, says, sure, let's do it, because Harrow could not have, prepared for this. And it turns out that Harrow actually did prepare for this because she stayed up all night burying bones under the ground so that way she could, beat Gideon, because she totally anticipated this happening. So Gideon goes to Bone Church. And at Bone Church, Harrow reads the letter, which reveals that she has been summoned to go and become a lictor, one of God's immortal soldiers, remember? And it's actually not just Gideon, but also her cavalier, Ortis Ninjanad. And Ortis's mom is not happy about this development because Ortis's dad was the cavalier to Harrow's parents, and he also died around the same time they did. So she just does not want Ortis to risk his life and possibly die, so they make a run for it out of the church. And Gideon's feeling super smug at Harrow's misfortune because they're arch enemies. And at that point, Harrow reveals that Ortis and his mom have stolen the spaceship that was meant to take Gideon away, trapping Gideon on the ninth house, ruining her escape plan. Because, Harrow absolutely fucking hates Gideon. No offense. I'm gonna take down Ortis because he's not relevant for the rest of this book. And we're gonna move Gideon into this position. After Gideon mopes for a while, Harrow actually reveals a plan to her. She needs a cavalier, and Gideon is one of the most talented swordsmen that the ninth house has ever produced since their age of mythic heroes. So she asks Gideon to train with a rapier with a deal. When Harrow becomes a lictor, she is not going to need Gideon for anything, ever. So if Gideon comes with her while she trains to become a lictor, she will set Gideon on her way for the rest of her life as soon as Harrow achieves lictorhood. No tricks, nothing. And so Gideon says, sure. So she learns how to fight with a rapier instead of her two-hander, and she's kind of okay with it. She's still a great swordsman. It's just clearly not her thing. The duo go from the ninth house to the first house, where Cannon House, which is a crumbling old mansion, is where all of the other houses are going to be sending their potential lictors. It's super sunny compared to the ninth house, which actually gets no natural sunlight from Dominicus, so Gideon whips out the iconic Dave Strider sunglasses that you see on the cover of the book. Harrow's direction to Gideon is that she has taken a vow of silence and to just follow Harrow's lead, right? And immediately Gideon can't do that because Dulcie of the seventh house takes a spill getting out of the spaceship, and Gideon, being a big gay idiot, goes and tries to help her. Dulcie is terminally ill and rapidly deteriorating throughout the book, so her collapse immediately sets off Gideon's noble savior complex that we're going to see a few times. But when Gideon goes to help Dulcie, Protosolius draws his sword on Gideon for touching his necromancer, which means that Harrow tries to start a fight with Protosolius for drawing his sword on her cavalier. And from this point on, Harrow is super weird about Gideon going and becoming friends with the 7th house. So there's this big first day of camp assembly where we as the reader and Gideon as a character figure out that the 9th house is a little bit like different than the other houses. So like all of the houses, like from the 2nd house to the 8th house, are actually like kind of familiar with each other, and they have different prayers. Like the 9th house's prayers are actually kind of morbid. They don't match with everybody else's. And the 9th house actually keeps to themselves. So after we meet everybody and we go through this big first day of camp assembly, we get the rules from teacher, which is that everybody is here to become a lictor and they can't enter any locked doors without permission. Gideon immediately loses track of Harrow. Like, she doesn't see her for several days. All she knows is that Harrow is coming back to their dorm, like, to sleep. But that's it. And despite the fact that Gideon is, under a vow of silence, everybody except for the 8th house is pretty nice. Like, she spars, and Dulcie, like, flirts with her, like, super hard and has, like, this interest in, her gold eyes and, like, her red hair. And I'm honestly just going to put a note there for gold eyes and red hair because it's so, like, during Gideon's own solo explorations of Cannon House, she actually comes across this locked door that's hidden behind this big tapestry near an empty swimming pool. So she, like, carefully recovers the tapestry so that the 3rd house doesn't see it while they're exploring. And Ianthe, like, subtly threatens her to not mess with the necromancer of the 3rd house. Necromancer, singular, by the way. So after a while, Gideon realizes that Harrow hasn't been back to their dorm to sleep, which again, despite the fact she hasn't seen her, she knows that she's been coming back, and Gideon immediately goes looking for her because she doesn't care or anything. With the help of the 6th house, who have been like going around and carbon dating things and, by the way, getting super wonky results, Gideon finds Harrow unconscious in some underground secret laboratory and manages to recover her and bring her back. Gideon and Harrow essentially like make a truce and decide to work together. So Harrow has to tell Gideon everything that she's found out. And it turns out that since the first night in Cannon House, Harrow has been going around and cataloging every single door. And she has found which ones are locked and which ones are unlocked. And she clarified with teacher that she can enter a locked door with permission. So while she was down in that secret underground laboratory, she actually found a trial, and she and Gideon go back to it. It's called winnowing. And essentially, Harrow has to defeat some sort of bone monster while she has to stand outside of the room it's in and can't see it. So she's like not able to fight it. And Gideon wants to fight it because its arms look like swords. So she goes in, and they realize that the way that Gideon can defeat the monster is that Harrow has to, like, slide her consciousness into Gideon's skull and, like, combine their sight together. The inherent homoeroticism of having to share a skull, it cannot be overstated. Abigail and Magnus decide that they want to throw an anniversary party, and everybody is invited, which means that Gideon annoys Harrow into going. The party itself is like an amazing scene because Magnus is making the most beautiful dad jokes and puns, and Corona Beth thinks that they're hilarious, and everyone's in the most uncomfortable conversations with each other, and also everyone's like thirsting after Gideon because of like her super like toned buff arms. And I could honestly read a book just with the dynamics that we see at that particular party. Harrow spots Abigail talking to the 8th house about the secret underground laboratory, so she makes Gideon leave the party because they have to go and defeat this monster because now they've lost their advantage. They race back to Imaging, and Gideon defeats the bone monster with Harrow in her brain, and as a reward, they get a key. And then, like, Harrow gets super, like, she really liked being in Gideon's brain while she was fighting. It's honestly really cute, because Gideon gets, like, a little flustered over it. They're the best. So then they like go to leave the laboratory, and at the bottom of the ladder to get into it, Abigail and Magnus are dead. Did that feel abrupt to you? Because it's super abrupt, and this is now a murder mystery book. I totally forgot to put up the brain sharing card, so that's gonna go up now. Pour one out for Abigail and Magnus. The ultimate wife guy, dead too soon. So when they died, the fifth was actually carrying a key, and nobody is able to locate it. Everybody comes down to the secret facility, and they all start trying their own necromantic specialties to try and like communicate with Abigail and Magnus, or like at least figure out what happened. Anthe eats Babs. Yes. She eats Babs. Like, she eats like his hair and like some of his fingernails and like, you know, a little bit of blood, but like not full on cannibalism yet. Silas siphons Colum in front of everybody, and it totally freaks everybody out, and nobody likes it, and nobody likes these guys. I don't like these guys. I wish I didn't have to mention that plot point, but here we are. So teacher warns everybody that there's a monster in Cannon House, and the fourth teenagers like cling to Gideon because Magnus really liked her, and they can also tell that this big lesbian is like here to protect them, and I really respect them in that moment. The second house wants to call off the entire trial. Like, they just want to send everybody home and figure out what happened to Abigail and Magnus. But the fourth house wants to hunt the monster because they're vengeful teenagers. So with the key that they secured from imaging, Gideon and Harrow go to that door that Gideon found earlier near the swimming pool, and their key gets them in, and it turns out that it was a dormitory, and they deduce that a cavalier and their necromancer previously resided there. While exploring, Gideon finds two notes. One of them says, "One flesh, one end, GNP," and the other note in this impossibly old dormitory with a locked door says Gideon. Also, Harrow decides that like she and Gideon officially need to work together. Like, super cute. Gideon and Harrow are now officially working together, and Dulcie approaches them to make a deal. She's found a trial that she knows how to complete but is physically unable to do so. So she wants to let Harrow and Gideon do it and get the key, and in exchange, when they're done with it, they'll give it to her so she can use it. It's called avulsion, and in order to complete it, Harrow would have to siphon Gideon. And immediately, Harrow says no. Like, super abrupt, super fast, and it's like, okay. And Gideon is really down to try, but Harrow like will not agree to do it until Dulcie reveals that they're actually not the first people she asked. She previously suggested the idea to Palamedes and Camilla, and they said no. So Harrow immediately is like, okay, well, now we have to do it. I have to beat the sixth house. Harrow siphons Gideon, who doesn't take it well, to put it lightly, and she nearly dies. But when Harrow comes back with the key, Gideon is like falling unconscious, and she sees Harrow without face paint for the first time ever. And also for the first time ever, Harrow calls Gideon by her name. Like, up until this point, she's only been calling her Griddle or Nav, and for the first time, she says Gideon. Gideon needs to recover from the entire ordeal, so in order to help her recover while she's gone, Harrow left her some bread in the drawer. It's one of my favorite stupid Harrow moments. I'm obsessed with her. And in addition to the drawer bread, she also asked for, you know, Pal and Cam to come and check on her since the sixth house has a medical specialty. And Gideon's fine, just really tired. So through Corona Beth throwing a temper tantrum because the third house is falling behind in these trials, it's revealed that there aren't an infinite amount of keys for everybody to win. While the sixth house is examining the bodies of Abigail and Magnus, Gideon notices that there's like some weird tension between Dulcie and Pal. And then Camilla points out the Protosalius is like, you know, really big and strong, but he's basically like a walking sleeper. The next morning, Isaac asks Gideon to come with him because he and Jean Marie found human remains in an incinerator, And he also asks Coronabeth to come because she's like super hot and the least weird person here, but like everybody comes with them to go and see the human remains that are in the incinerator. Everybody except for Harrow. The kids insist that it's the monster again, and then when the seventh house doesn't show up for a scheduled duel, Gideon finds Dulcie in her favorite reading spot, left out in the rain, super sick, because Protosolius never came back for her. Ianthe points out that the human remains have actually been dead for a really long time, like about 8 weeks, and that there are actually 2 different human remains in the incinerator. So 2 different people are dead and stuffed in there. Silas steals Dulcie's keys because she is sick and the 8th house sucks. Judith decides that the situation is not falling apart fast enough for her liking, so she challenges the 6th house for their keys, clearly picking on them, by the way, because they're like seen as the weak librarian house, which makes it all the more satisfying when it's revealed that Camilla is actually like the most amazing fighter and she absolutely rocks the 2nd house's shit and gets their keys instead. So like, go loud, Cam. I love her so much. And then Babs decides to challenge the 6th house for their keys, which are now, also the 2nd house's keys, because Babs sucks just so much. And Coronabeth does not want him to challenge the 6th house, but Ianthe does. Cam got injured when she was dueling the 2nd house, and she's totally down to do it again. But Gideon steps up and is totally ready to fight, and Harrow, quote, rose to the occasion like an evening star and throws the 9th house's hat in the ring to fight on behalf of the 6th house, because her logic is an old 9th house adage that goes, death first to vultures and scavengers. And then Babs, because he got his ass kicked earlier in the book by Gideon, calls off the entire thing. So, with the 6th house and the 9th house like unsteady allies, they decide that they need to go and find Protosolius. Harrow volunteers to go with the 6th house to go and look after Dulcie because, again, she's like super weird about Gideon spending any time with the 6th house, while Gideon is going to take Jean-Marie and Isaac and go and look for Protosolius in the creepy underground laboratory. Now, 2 huge things happen in this scene. Gideon hugs Harrow goodbye. Gideon points out that if Palamedes Sextus rearranges the first 3 letters of his first name and his last name, you get Sexpal. And that breaks her vow of silence to everybody. Guess what? The facility is still haunted. The monster kills Isaac, who tries to fight it, and Gideon manages to get out of there with Jean-Marie and hides in the secret dorm that she and Harrow discovered. But the monster murders Jean-Marie when Gideon falls asleep for a few minutes, so Gideon is super torn up over it, Harrow is super pissed about it, and the 8th house invites Gideon to have tea with them. Nothing like murdering some teenagers. Pour one out. Palamedes shows Harrow this locked door that he found where actually the lock is gummed up with regenerating ash, which is like bone cement, which means that Harrow can manipulate it if she had just a little bit more power. So Gideon is like, siphon me, and it works. So they get the regenerating ash out of the lock, but they are missing the key that would grant them entrance. Gideon and Harrow get into this massive fight because Gideon wants to go and see Dulcie, and Harrow doesn't want her to, so Gideon says that she hates Harrow, and Harrow says that she doesn't even think about Gideon like half the time, and then she reminds Gideon that unless she sets Gideon free, they will never, ever be free of each other. So Gideon decides to go and have tea with the 8th house. Silas reveals that the spaceship that Gideon was supposed to escape on actually exploded and killed Ortis and his mother, and their revenants, their angry ghosts, made it all the way back to the 8th house where Ortis's mom was from, and they spilled all of these 9th house secrets. And they revealed that, surprise, all of the 9th house children are dead. And Silas points out that the story that exists of some insane infection coming and killing all of the 9th house kids at once doesn't exactly make sense. We get a history lesson about the 9th house. So apparently it wasn't supposed to exist. The founders of the house were supposed to just go to the ninth house, close the locked tomb, and then die with it. But they didn't. They started their own house. And the eighth house is made up of a bunch of religious weirdos who remember this, and so they don't like the ninth house on principle. Let's just pretend that siphoning has been there like the entire time. Cool. Silas wants to steal the keys that Gideon has, but Cullum lets Gideon go. And Gideon like wanders around Cannon House, and she duels Corona, who, number one, is like really good at dueling for a necromancer, and is also like, number two, super hot while she does it. And then Gideon like goes back to her quarters, and she finds Protosalius' severed head in Harrow's belongings. Again, did that feel like just super abrupt? Because it's super abrupt. Gideon goes to Sex Pal for help, and she confides in him that she's responsible for Harrow's parents being dead. If we want to revise our timeline just super quickly, 7 years ago, Harrow's parents died. 7 years ago, Harrow broke into the locked tomb. She and Gideon had just gotten into this awful fight where Harrow like scratched up the entirety of Gideon's face, and Gideon saw her enter the locked tomb. So she snitched. It's so tragic that Gideon is a snitch. Like, we all have flaws and we all have red flags, and hers just happens to be that she's a snitch. Harrow's parents, thinking that, you know, the locked tomb opening would be the end of the world, and that they had just broken their house's like job that had been their job for thousands of years, Kermitted. Ortis's dad did alongside them, and Harrow was going to also, but before she could, Gideon saw her, and Harrow stopped. Dulcie confesses to everybody that Protosalius has actually been dead since they arrived at Cannon House, and that she had frozen his corpse, which is a 7th house specialty. At this point, she's like really sick, and Pal is tending to her, and that makes Gideon feel like kind of weird. Judith demands that Teacher call the 7th house and send Dulcie home, but he reveals that he can't do that. None of them can leave. We're at the pool chapter. We are at the pool chapter, bolded, italicized, underlined, like big text, capital letters, the pool chapter. So let's like get into this, because I'm honestly not going to survive this part. Harrow and Gideon go back to the pool near the dormitory, and this time it is filled with salt water, and Harrow jumps in because she and her parents had always sworn that if they were going to discuss the secrets of the 9th house, they were only going to do it over salt water. So she jumps in, and Gideon jumps in after her, and she is like, finally, she tells Gideon the truth. First and foremost, she knew that Protosalius was dead from the moment that she saw him, which is super fair because, again, she has been puppeting her dead parents for the last 7 years. So, of course, she's going to recognize somebody doing the same thing. And ironically, Gideon also noticed it, but she's like a bit too delightfully dumb to have realized that that's what she was noticing about him. Harrow got Protosalius' head because she like gave him a little nudge and his head just came off, and she just hid the head with her, other possessions. She actually doesn't know how his body got in the incinerator. 17 years ago, Harrow's parents were desperate to conceive a necromancer in order to leave the house and to continue guarding the locked tomb. To ensure that they would conceive a necromancer, they gathered up every child in the 9th house from 6 weeks to 18 years and killed them all at once. And any child that would be conceived during that much Thanergy in the air would definitely be a necromancer. That's how Harrow was conceived and how she was born. Like, pause, absorb that. Harrow calls herself a war crime. And then she reveals that Gideon was also supposed to die. That she was actually 2 cots away from where the nerve gas entered the room. And she just was fine. And this is why everybody in the ninth house is like repulsed and scared of her. And you know what? Gideon is sorry for Harrow, and Harrow immediately lashes out at this fact, and she says, "You are my only friend. I am undone without you." So Gideon and Harrow pledge themselves to each other and finally become a true necromancer cavalier pair by saying the words that every necromancer and cavalier say to each other when they swear each other to their service. One flesh, one end. This scene killed me. I read this for the first time in 2019 and it killed me, and I still haven't recovered. There's one final revelation. Inside of the tomb, the thing that will bring about the death of the Emperor of God himself is a girl. She is asleep in a coffin packed with ice with a sword. And Harrow is in love with her. The next day, the 6th house and the 9th house pick the lock with the regenerative ash into the locked door that they found, and it's another lab. Yay! In it, they discover evidence that all of these skeletons that have been walking around the first house, like cleaning up after them, cooking their food, are actually the remains of several hundred souls that have been stuffed into the bodies of Teacher and the other Cannon House priests. Someone pulls an alarm and all of the priests are dead. Teacher is dead in his office, and Marta is also dead because he fought back and killed her, and Judith is super injured. Judith called for help. She called the Emperor for help, and he is on the way. And guess what? That key that the 5th house was carrying that nobody could find, it was inside Abigail's body, and the 8th house went and took it out of her corpse. This is when shit gets crazy. Everybody except Judith finds Ianthe Tridentarius covered in blood, Corona Beth crying hysterically, and Babs dead. Can I get like a wahoo for Babs being dead though? like, oh, sorry. like, okay, Babs is dead, who cares? It turns out Ianthe is the only necromancer of the 3rd house, and that as everybody else has been running around and looking for keys and having these little interpersonal dramas, she reverse engineered Lictorhood on her own, and she just achieved it. So this is the first reason why I am an Ianthe Tridentarius stan until the grave. She sucks so much, but she reverse engineered Lictorhood on her own. To achieve Lictorhood, the necromancer has to murder their cavalier, so that way their cavalier's soul will power them forever, like an immortal battery. And they absorb all of their cavalier's combat skills. That's why cavaliers use a rapier, which is a super light sword that necromancers can wield with the little muscle mass that they have. Silas tries to siphon Ianthe to defeat her, but, you know, she just got a major power-up, so it doesn't work. But she's having a lot of difficulty making Babs work with her in terms of, like, combat skill, and, like, you know what, I'll throw Babs a bone here. Like, that's fair. The guy was just murdered, but, like, he's just so useless at every turn. Anyways, Colm gets possessed by, like, something while he's being siphoned, and that something kills Silas, and then Ianthe kills Colm. And Corona Beth? She's crying not because Babs was just murdered, but because Ianthe didn't murder her instead. Cam reveals that Pal has actually been in love with Dulcie since they were kids, and that he proposed to her the year before, and she said no. They've been pen pals all of their lives. So Gideon runs to go and apologize to him for being a homewrecker. Before she can say anything, Pal freezes her in the hallway outside of Dulcie's room, and he goes in to speak to Dulcie. Surprise, it's not Dulcie at all. It's actually Cytherea, who is a lictor. Cytherea has been posing as Dulcie, and killing everybody in Cannon House in order to lure the Emperor back into the solar system. Dulcie and Protosalius actually did answer the call to become lictors, but Cytherea intercepted them along the way and murdered them and then stuffed their corpses into the incinerator. Pal fights back by giving her, and I quote, turbo cancer, because like Dulcinea, Cytherea is also terminally ill with the same disease, and oh no, she's about to explode? So Pal yells, Gideon, tell Camilla, oh wait, she knows what to do. Gideon does tell Cam these last words, and Camilla does confirm that she knows what to do. But Cytherea didn't die, because lictors are like, super hard to kill. So Harrow, Gideon, and Cam have to team up to fight her and the bone monster that she just created. And this leads to one of the most iconic quotes in the entire book. Harrow says, show them what the Ninth House does. And Gideon goes, we do bones, motherfucker. I don't think I'm going to get this monetized. I mean, I don't know how monetization works, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get monetized. Gideon and Harrow use what they learned in the trial and, smash their minds together in order to defeat the monster. And then Harrow faints. Cam and Gideon are both injured. Enter Ianthe Tridentarius, and suddenly we're in a lictor boss fight until Cytherea, separates Ianthe from her sword arm. So pour one out for Ianthe's sword arm. Once again, Babs has proven to be completely useless. Harrow comes to, and everyone's backs are against the wall. Gideon and Cam can't fight anymore, and Harrow's using the last of her strength to hold Cytherea back, so she makes Gideon promise to go back to the Ninth House and to protect the tomb. It's a save yourself, I'll hold them back moment. So Gideon says, fuck this, and by the way, that is her dialogue. Harrow asks what she's doing, and Gideon says, the cruelest thing anyone has ever done to you in your entire life, believe me. You'll know what to do, and if you don't do it, what I'm about to do will be no use to anyone. And Harrow realizes what Gideon's about to do just a few seconds before it happens and tries to stop her, but Gideon falls back onto a spiked gate, and she dies. I remember reading this book for the first time, and I think I screamed at this part. I just sat there in my old apartment, in my kitchen, with my hands over my mouth, in complete shock, because Gideon dies. So with Gideon's soul in her head, Harrow becomes a lictor and defeats Cytherea, and she doesn't want it. She asks Gideon not to leave her, and Gideon won't. That's the whole point. She says to Gideon, I cannot conceive of a world without you in it. And then Gideon quotes a Bible verse and says, see you on the flip side, sugar lips. And she disappears completely. Harrow wakes up in a space station, and the Emperor is there. And she asks him to bring back Gideon Nav. And he says that he can't do that. And in this insane exchange that sounds like one of those 2014 Tumblr posts where people run into Obama or a mushroom in one of those dreams where they get this profound thing said to them, Harrow says, but you're God. And he says, I'm not enough. So lictorhood can't even be undone by God. Ianthe and Harrow were the only two people found alive at Cannon House, and Cytherea's corpse is the only corpse that was recovered. So Gideon's body is nowhere to be found. Harrow agrees to be a lictor, and she's titled Harrow Hark the First. End of book 1. All right, how are we feeling? Because I was completely devastated the first time I read this book. It's an amazing book. It's fantastic. But the ending? Oh my God. So with this book, we resolved 2 mysteries. We figured out what is the deal with lictorhood, and we solved the murders in the end. But we still have 2 more mysteries. There's a lot of stuff happening with Gideon that we don't know. Why did she survive the nerve gas? Where is her body? And then with the locked tomb, it's who is this girl that could, kill God? And so, it's time for Harrow and it's time for a little bit of a set change. I'm not really good at snapping. Here we are in Harrow. We've got new mysteries, we've got new characters, and we have a new setup. There is some stuff behind me, so like, don't worry, I'm gonna move around a lot in this video again, so that way you can see everything. So for Harrow, we have new mysteries. We have the work, the notes, the emperor, AL, and the corpse, alongside our two mysteries that carried over from the last book. As promised, we're going to start with a quick vocab lesson and character recap at the top, so that way I just don't have to do it again as we're talking. A revenant, which was actually previously mentioned when I was discussing Ortis and his mother, is a vengeful spirit that can attach itself to an, inanimate object, but also to a person and possess them. A revenant beast is the vengeful spirit of a planet. When the resurrection happened and all 9 houses were created, 9 resurrection beasts were set loose. Heralds are like these, insect kind of warriors. They're awful, and they follow revenant beasts around, and they drive lictors mad if they look at them. And then there's the river, which is a 2-parter. So there's the physical river, which is like this undercurrent to the universe where lictors can drop into the river, travel along it, and then pop out like billions of light years away after just a few minutes of traveling. The issue is that it would kill normal people, and lictors get swarmed by vengeful spirits if they're underwater. Then there is the spiritual river, which is also the physical one. It's where ghosts go when they die. And the 5th house was particularly knowledgeable about the river because they do spirit magic, and nobody really knows what's beyond the river. As for characters, the cast is much smaller this time around. I left up all the characters from the previous book because I really like the visual, how, Mike's Mike built out over the course of the Pretty Little Liars seasons. I really like the visual up here. So, our characters this time around, God / the Emperor / John Gaius, he's just a guy, God. For the record, the book switches between calling him John, the Emperor, and God, so I'm probably going to switch around as I'm talking about him. The first lictor is the Saint of Patience, Augustine Kincaid, which makes him originally of the 5th house, and his cavalier prior to becoming a lictor was his brother, Alfred. Next, there's the Saint of Joy, Mercy Morn, and her cavalier before becoming a lictor was Christabel Oct, making them originally of the 8th house. Next, there's the Saint of Duty, Ortis, whose cavalier before becoming a lictor was Paradve. Cytherea was already in the previous book. She's dead now, but her cavalier before becoming a lictor was Loveday, and they were originally of the 7th house, hence her being able to assume Dulcie's identity. We also have Blood of Eden, who aren't a character so much as they are an organization of characters, but they kind of get sorted in here. They're the anti-god and necromancy resistance fighters. The style of this book is completely different from the first one. It's primarily told in 2nd-person perspective in the present, so it says, you felt this way, you did this, you said. For flashbacks to Cannon House, it's in 3rd person. It's also structured like a Greek tragedy, so there's dramatis personae, there's parados, epiparados, and an epilogue, and I was super happy because I'm a theater kid, so I was I love that. And a fair warning about this book, if you're watching this and you're unfamiliar, this book is confusing, and it's meant to be confusing. It's not a bug, it's by design. The first time I read this book, I quite literally felt like I was misremembering things and misunderstanding, and everything makes sense by the end, and it feels amazing to have all of that paid off. So I have kept this recap to be as like true to the confusing nature as possible while still explaining things by the end. This isn't going to be a Harrow the Ninth explained, it's a Harrow the Ninth recap, but by recapping it, a lot of things will be explained. The book starts with a prologue taking place the night of the Emperor's murder. Harrow and Ianthe are on a space station that is 10 minutes away from being invaded. They hate flirt a lot, and Ianthe is feeling really smug because she knows something that Harrow doesn't. And once Ianthe leaves, Harrow is stabbed from behind, and she dies with 3 syllables on her lips. But she doesn't understand what she says. In a flashback taking place 14 months before the Emperor's murder, Harrow and Ortis are reading the letter that summoned Harrow to come to Cannon House and become a lictor. Ortis isn't feeling too confident as her cavalier because he isn't very good with a sword, so he asks why she's never considered Ortis Ninjanad as her cavalier. And when Harrow's kind of confused about this, he just moves on. The body enters the scene as a Ninth House nun and tells Harrow this isn't how it happens. Ortis can't see the body, and so Harrow confides in him that she's mad. I feel like that was really dramatic, but like, this book honestly requires like a level of drama compared to the first one, but we'll have some one-liners in here, I hope. I don't know if I can be funny about this one. 9 months before the Emperor's murder, Harrow, Ianthe, Mercymorn, and God are all on a spaceship, and there's something wrong with Harrow. She's super weak, and she can't wield the two-hander that God gave her, which is kind of an issue because she absorbed Ortis to be able to use a sword. During this time, she kind of drifts in and out of consciousness, and her only friend is the body. God shows Harrow 500 people that he resurrected 10,000 years ago during the resurrection that he's going to send to the Ninth House in order to like rebuild their population and rebuild the house. And when Harrow asks if she can go and deliver these bodies, God tells her that she can never again go to the Ninth House or the solar system because the resurrection beasts are chasing them and they cannot risk getting the resurrection beasts near the 9 houses. God explains that there were 9 resurrection beasts to start and that they killed 5. While he's going through this monologue, Harrow notices that something about his math is wrong and that one of the resurrection beasts is unaccounted for. And as much as I would love to like explain to you exactly why his math is wrong, I'm really bad with math and it's kind of like a funky little puzzle. So like my brain instantly like started like oozing out of the side of my ears. So I can't, but just know that there is one resurrection beast that is completely unaccounted for and that Harrow notices it too. Harrow insists that she's half a lictor, and God tells her that Ortis didn't die for nothing. But when he says it, there's something weird about his mouth, and Harrow like throws up everywhere and then passes out, which is like, you know, just super normal, like super chill. Also, God can't see the body. In an extensive flashback, it's recounted how Harrow spent years breaking into the tomb. She had to go through all of these different levels of security until finally, one day, she enters the tomb and she sees the body in her coffin, packed in ice, chained, and with her sword, and Harrow falls in love with her. She spends her days just staring at the body, completely devoted to the body. And like, yeah, she like studies bones and things, but she's obsessed with the body. And she hallucinates it everywhere. The body follows her around throughout her childhood and her teenage years. At some point, Harrow's parents find out that she has broken into the locked tomb, and they die. But Harrow stays alive because she wants to live just in case the body ever wakes up. And she's alone, and that's why she takes so much comfort in the body. It is noted that there was a girl who grew up alongside Harrow in the 9th house, but she died before Harrow was ever born. So something's like really wrong here, right? After a light murder attempt, Harrow comes to with Ianthe at her bedside with a new arm put on, and with Babs's eyes instead of Ianthe's, because when a lictor absorbs their cavalier's soul, they switch eye color. Harrow left Ianthe with instructions to deliver her a letter to be read upon her coherence. 2 days after the event of the first book, Harrow enlisted Ianthe's help for something called the work, which Harrow can't explain to her current self without risking harm coming to her. Past Harrow leaves her current self some guidelines to live by. Number 1, stay alive. Number 2, she can never return to the ninth house. Number 3, the two-hander is dangerous and it cannot touch bone or flesh. So Harrow wraps it in an exoskeleton to make sure it never touches anything. Number 4, Harrow is not a full lictor. The work has compromised her. Number 5, she owes Ianthe some kind of debt and they've made an agreement that she's only getting out of in death, but it doesn't extend into the tomb. She does not know what this agreement is. Number 6, she can only open the other letters when the situation calls for it, not before. And finally, she needs to examine Ianthe's teeth and jaws, and if Ianthe has changed them, Harrow needs to be aware that she's in danger. So to examine them, she's going to have to get close to Ianthe. Harrow wrote 24 letters. She is given 22 of them. Ianthe keeps 2, one of which is, to be opened if Harrow ever dies. And then the other 22 are given to Harrow, one of them she just read. These are all of the letters that we know exist in this book. To open upon coherence, again, just read that one. If met, give to Camilla Hecht. To open if the ninth house is in mortal danger. To open in the event of the Emperor's death. To open if you meet Judith Duertos. To open in the event of Ianthe's death. To open if your eyes change. And to open if you meet Coronabeth Tridentarius. To examine Ianthe's jaw and teeth from close range, Harrow kisses her. Now this is what I call mess, and my Ianthe loving heart is just over the moon at this level of mess for her. And the narration is in disbelief. A few times it's just what the fuck? And I'm same. Ianthe hasn't changed her jaw or her teeth, which means that she is still sworn to secrecy. Ianthe stabs Harrow, not because of the kiss, but it proves that Harrow can't heal as fast as a lictor is supposed to, because they heal nearly instantaneously, and she doesn't. So, a flashback to the arrival at Cannon House. Harrow and Ortis are in their shuttle approaching, and Harrow finds a note. The note says, "The eggs you gave me all died, and you lied to me." But Ortis only sees a blank scrap of paper. God, Harrow, and Mercy all leave the spaceship to go back to the Mithraeum, which is God's super holy space station billions of light years away from where they currently are. During this exchange, it's revealed that Mercy, Morn, and Augustine don't talk and have a really awful relationship. So to get those billions of light years away, they are going to travel using the river. And when they go underwater, Harrow sees all of the dead children of the ninth house that make up her soul, and she starts using necromancy, which she's not supposed to be able to do, and this causes chaos in the ship. And when she's underwater looking at all those dead kids, she sees a toddler with red hair and skull paint, and for some reason, this absolutely breaks her. In a flashback to Cannon House, again, teachers explaining that Cannon House actually existed before the resurrection, and it's where God and 10 people went and discovered lictorhood, which doesn't make sense because there are 8 lictors before Ianthe and Harrow, and if they all paired up, that would only be 5. So it can be assumed that actually more people came post-resurrection to become lictors. Anyways, teacher explains that there's actually a monster in Cannon House called the Sleeper. And if the Sleeper ever wakes, it will kill everybody in Cannon House. Harrow and Ortis find Abigail and Magnus in the library examining super old scraps of paper, and Abigail hands Harrow one of those scraps of paper. Harrow reads it, and the paper is ranting about zombies. It's a continuation of the egg note, actually. But when she, gives it back, it's revealed that the paper is just talking about, let me check. Oh, dinner. Harrow wakes up in a chapel made of bones aboard the Mithraeum. God, Mercy Morn, and Augustine are all holding a funeral for Cytherea, whose body is being laid to rest in the Mithraeum. At the end of this funeral, the final lictor joins the scene. Ortis. At his appearance, Harrow starts bleeding out of her ears and passes out. When she comes to later, she's standing above Cytherea's body, and the two-hander is plunged deep inside of the corpse. End of Act 1. 6 months before the Emperor's murder, Harrow is killing planets. So to kill a planet, a lictor actually has to kill it twice. Once in the physical world, and then they have to go down into the river and fight the planet before it becomes like a minor resurrection beast. They do this in order to convert the planet from thalergetic to thanergetic, and all the planets that they're killing are in the path of the oncoming resurrection beast that's on its way to Mithraeum. Harrow has a problem. Usually when lictors go into the river, their body can take care of themselves. It's the whole reason why they absorbed a cavalier in the first place, but because something went wrong with the process with Ortis, Harrow can't take care of her own body. It just becomes useless, and her necromancy stops, so she's been compromised. Ianthe and Harrow are becoming super fast frenemies in the Mithraeum because Mercy Morn and Augustine, despite, being their teachers, have literally zero patience for the two of them. Augustine is supposed to teach Ianthe, but she's having trouble with her sword arm because Babs, useless, isn't cooperating with her. On the other hand, John has a soft spot for Harrow, and they have these big philosophical conversations, and he doesn't even freak out when she tells him she's a war crime. So aside from John and Ianthe, Harrow's only other friend is the body, who follows her around constantly. Starting 10 months before the Emperor's murder, Ortis starts trying to kill Harrow. He attempts her murder 14 times and is able to get past every one of her defenses, and God can't stop him because Ortis made a deal with somebody to always protect God from any danger. And Harrow, because, she's a half of a lictor, is a liability and therefore a danger to God. John gives us some backstory on the tomb. Anastasia, after, somehow botching the lictorial process, was sent back to the Ninth House with one job. She needed to close the tomb. And she needed to close the tomb because what's buried in there is a monster. And God calls this monster A.L., short for Annabelle Lee. The first time I read this series, this was the moment that I understood that these books take place in a very far future version of our solar system. I had my suspicions, but this was the moment where it was confirmed, nope, these are our planets. So little sidebar here that honestly, might not matter, but it might matter. Who knows? We know that the first house is Earth because it existed before the resurrection. It's a watery planet. It's sunny. We know that the sixth house is the closest planet to Dominicus, making it Mercury. Later on, we get confirmation that the second closest house to Dominicus is the seventh, making this Venus. And of course, the furthest house from Dominicus that gets no natural light is the ninth house, making it Pluto, which is a planet, by the way. In Cannon House, things are going terribly wrong. It's a torrential downpour outside, and Judith Duertos, Palamedes Sextus, and Camilla Hecht are all dead, and they've all been shot, which is concerning because nobody in Cannon House has a gun except for the sleeper, who wears this orange hazmat suit and an apparatus that completely covers their face. Dulcie and Protesalius come and pay their respects to, the sixth house, which is interesting because this is the first time we've ever met these characters. Remember, Protesalius was dead all of last book, and Dulcie was actually Cytherea, so this is the first time we meet them, and it's kind of cool because Protesalius is actually, super into poetry, which pisses off Ortis because he's into poetry, and that's his thing. So the sleeper rests in a coffin, and Marta says that there is one other thing in that coffin, a two-hander. Harrow finds another note, and this one is ranting about burning wizards, but when she gives it to Ordis, he only sees the cool S. I'm gonna give a visual on what the cool S is before I put it on the wall to make sure that everybody is familiar with the cool S. So back in Mithraeum, the body wakes Harrow up from a dream because Cytherea's corpse is walking, and it tries to get into Harrow's room, so she goes and asks Ianthe for help, and Ianthe, my beloved, is completely useless. End of Act 2. So at this point, you're like noticing that things are a bit different than we remember. 4 months before the Emperor's murder, things are pretty tense in Mithraeum. Augustine is super annoyed with Ianthe because she is like not improving with her swordsmanship at all. One night, Harrow is walking around and she goes and decides to visit Cytherea's like tomb, and Ordis is in there getting like handsy. And he doesn't kill her like, you know, he's been trying to do for the last few months. And he just asks her in this weird voice to like, please leave. So Harrow tells Ianthe, who's like, okay, well, like, who hasn't done that? Because Ianthe is many things, but she is a weirdo. So they get into this argument, and Harrow tries to draw the two-hander, and Ianthe's like, don't you ever wonder why God gave that to you? And Harrow, like, starts, you know, like, hemorrhaging again, and she asks for the first time directly about the work, and Ianthe reveals that, you know, like, sworn to secrecy thing, she can't even tell Harrow what the work is. Ordis tries to kill Harrow again, and this time he, like, manages to break through her specific wards and attacks her while she's in the bath, so she doesn't feel like she can ever be safe again, and she decides that the only thing that's to be done is that she has to kill Ordis. So Harrow does the most insane thing that she can think of. She makes a soup. She stays up for 6 days straight, and she makes a soup for everybody, and John, like, has everybody sit down so that they can have dinner like a goddamn family for once. And the soup is awful, but Augustine is, like, delighted, because he loves having, like, new things enter his life after 10,000 years, and, like, it's a new way that somebody's, like, botched making a soup. Anyways, Harrow reveals that the special ingredient in the soup is her own bone marrow. And at this revelation, she explodes Ordis with the skeleton that she forms inside of him with her own bone marrow. like what? Like, she explodes Ordis with a skeleton made of her own bone marrow after staying awake for 6 days straight. So anyways, John undoes the skeleton and saves Ordis's life and makes Ianthe take Harrow back to her room and, like, get a good night's sleep while he interrogates Mercymorn for underestimating Harrow and overlooking all of that. And as Harrow is leaving to go back to Ianthe's room, Ordis salutes her, because you gotta respect the attempt. Harrow wakes up in Ianthe's room to find Ianthe trying to cut her arm off. It's her dueling arm, the one that Cytherea took off and then got replaced. The one that hasn't been cooperating. She's trying to take off her own arm, so Harrow does it for her, and then grows her a new skeleton arm? By the way, this scene is actually a substitution for a sex scene. And trust me, it reads like it. So Ianthe goes and tests out the arm by dueling Augustine a little bit, and guess what? It, like, works. It cooperates, and Augustine is, like, going to gild it in gold for her. And as a repayment for helping her with her arm, Ianthe decides that she is going to help Harrow kill Ordis. Quick break to cover what's happening in Cannon House at this point. Harrow cannot find Isaac or Jean-Marie. Coronabeth was pushed into the ocean by Silas, who also jumps in after her. Abigail gives Harrow another note that's ranting about a love triangle where one of the parties is in heaven and the other two are burning in hell. And again, there's nothing on that scrap of paper that actually talks about that. So Abigail concludes that Harrow is being haunted. And the entire time, everybody keeps asking Harrow if this is how it happens. Back to the Mithraeum. Harrow is sharing a bed with Ianthe like most nights because it's the only place where she feels safe, and like, again, they hate each other so much, but like, they're becoming like, you know, super gal pal-ish. Augustine agrees to help kill Ortis because he, like, I guess owes Ianthe a favor. And that brings us to the two most insane chapters that have ever been put to paper. Augustine decides that the way to kill Ortis involves a dinner party, so Ianthe gives Harrow this makeover, and they go and meet Augustine in his rooms ahead of dinner. And he confirms to them that when he wants Ortis gone, Ortis will be giddy gone. And then Mercy Morn enters, right? And all Augustine says to her about the plan is Dios Apate Minor. And Mercy Morn just like punches him so hard his teeth come out, and then he like regrets them because he's a lictor. And they have this nonverbal back and forth, but it ends with Mercy agreeing to the plan but being super upset about it. I'm closing my laptop for this one because this chapter is so crazy that I can... Okay, so Augustine's plan for this dinner is to get everybody insanely drunk and start talking about how hot all of their cavaliers were. And I just need to say, Augustine, I see you, and I respect you. So as soon as they start talking, he mentions a commander wake, and at that point, Ortis leaves the room. And then he and Mercy get a little bit like heated when he starts talking about, you know, the old cavaliers, and he kisses Mercy, and then he kisses God, and then Mercy kisses God. It's like the most insane chapter ever, and I am so happy that I have made my friends read this book because I've now had several people give me their reactions to hitting this part of the book specifically, and quite frankly, it is funny every single time. So anyways, with things heating up between God and two of his lictors, Ianthe and Harrow make a run for it. So, with God now incredibly distracted, it is time for Harrow to kill Ortis, and Ianthe tries to kiss her, and Harrow rejects her, and we all know that Ianthe just went back to her room and like cried her eyes out. She tried to play it cool, but we all know better. Ortis isn't where, you know, Harrow thought he would be, and this absolutely ruins her assassination attempt because she finds him like, you know, super bloodied up and in the incinerator where Cytherea's corpse is about to light him on fire and shoot him out into space and kill him. And instead of letting him die, Harrow saves Ortis's life. Ortis then reveals that he can't get through blood wards, essentially telling Harrow how to keep him from killing her. Essentially forever. And then he covers Harrow's eyes and he starts asking a love for the truth. And when Harrow asks him about that, he reveals that he doesn't know what she's talking about because sometimes he can't remember things and he loses track of time. That night, Harrow's in her room and she overhears Augustine and Mercy Morn arguing in the hallway. Nothing is forgiven between the two of them just because they made out, and they're both arguing over who hid Cytherea's corpse because neither of them can find it. End of Act 3. 2 months before the Emperor's murder, Harrow is killing a planet, and she realizes she's being followed by Camilla Hecht, my beloved. And this is a bit of an issue because Camilla is supposed to be dead. Harrow actually has a letter prepared for this circumstance, right? She has, if met, give to Camilla Hecht. So she gives the letter to Camilla Hecht, who reads it and then promptly destroys it. Harrow starts bleeding out of her eyes. Camilla gives Harrow a piece of a skull and says that it's Palamedes, actually, and that he's basically fixed his soul to that piece of skull, and Camilla needs Harrow to check to make sure that she got all of the pieces right. They had planned for this exact scenario in case of his untimely death, and to solve a mystery, that's what Camilla knows what to do. So Harrow goes into the river to check, and she finds Pal in like a bubble. And that bubble is the setting of his final moments, aka Dulcie's sick room. So he can't change anything about the scenario, like not even the quote, absurdly shitty romance novel that he is stuck with. Harrow tells Pal that she became a lictor and he is horrified. Their conversation is cut short when the sleeper arrives, and Pal is like super freaked out because he can't change anything about this bubble, which means that Harrow is changing the bubble by adding the sleeper, and as they're trying to hold her off, their heads bump together, and Pal sees something. Harrow is ejected out of the bubble, and as she's, going back to her body, for the first time in this book, the narration changes from second person to first person. You never could have guessed that he had seen me. I still get chills every time I read that line. Harrow confirms to Camilla that yes, she does have all the right pieces, Palamedes is there, and that she changes the skull into a hand as per Pal's request. Judith and Coronabeth, also supposed to be dead, arrive, and in their shuttle, there is a picture of a woman with red hair, and Harrow immediately starts bleeding again, and she is terrified of this woman. Harrow opens letter number 12 to open if you meet Judith Duertos. The letter instructs her to silence Judith by any means necessary, so she fuses her jaw shut. As one does, she also opens letter number 5 to open if you meet Coronabeth Tridentarius. In this letter, she and Ianthe are like arguing over the fact that by being indebted to Ianthe, she now has to protect Coronabeth Tridentarius even if it costs her her life. Coronabeth is actually carrying a rapier of the 9th house, and when Judith's jaw is unfused, she warns Harrow that there is a traitor in John's inner circle. Camilla reveals that the three of them are now with Blood of Eden, BOE. So this means that every character that we saw in one of the Cannon House flashbacks is actually alive, except for Silas, who sucks. So it's okay. Speaking of Cannon House, the vibes are deteriorating rapidly. It's freezing, and there are now organs lining the hallway. Gross. Teacher rants that in Cannon House, God put a collar around the devil's neck and that all of his disciples were terrified. And then he confirms that the devil is the woman that is in the locked tomb. 1 week before the Emperor's murder, everybody is on edge. Mercy Morn accidentally set off the alarm by looking at a resurrection beast and seeing a herald and panicking for a second. So everybody has to call in using their first initial and their cavalier's first initial. Augustine is AA, Ianthe is IN, Harrow calls in as HO, which makes Ianthe laugh, and there's also GP. Realizing that death is coming, Harrow puts her hands on the body and kisses her and begs her, and the body disappears, never to be seen for the rest of the book. And I just have to say that I find it so rich that Harrow would kiss a hallucination before she kisses Ianthe. Mercy explains that to fight the resurrection beast, they are going to fight it in the river by fighting it like on the upper levels and then pushing it down towards the riverbed where there are stoma, which are these portals to hell. They can't really fight the physical resurrection beast since it's the size of a planet, although it is noted that resurrection beasts don't really have to appear as planets. There are no rules about what they need to look like. Like, they mentioned a previous one was actually a beautiful woman. God also can't see hell. Like, it's a realm of chaos that he has no control over and he does not know what happens in, and anybody who has ever entered one of those stoma and gone to hell has never come back. Harrow's only direction for this battle is to not get in the way. And John offers for her to come with him into his super fortified airless chamber because he can't enter the fight. Dominicus gets its power from him, so he can't risk, fighting anything and possibly dying, and, he can't risk going mad by looking at a resurrection beast. Like, by all means necessary, John cannot die. There are a lot of memes I've been skipping over, but I really felt the need to just mention that this is where the nun house with left grief joke is. Harrow asks about AL, and God explains that she was his first resurrection and that she was not human. John tells her that he sometimes likes to imagine that she was his daughter. And this completely breaks Harrow, and she confesses to him that she went into the tomb, and John says that that's not possible. This entire time, the Ninth House has thought that the tomb could be opened, but it can't because it's actually attuned to John's blood. The blood ward can only open with his blood, and Harrow wants to protest and say that she knows that she went into the tomb, but nobody was there to watch her do it, and she thinks that she's completely lost it. And then John asks her, who's been messing with her temporal lobe? Harrow just runs out of the room. In the final few days, Harrow finds Cytherea's body under her bed. So she goes and gets Ianthe, who looks at it and says that she can't see it because gaslight gatekeep girl boss. So Harrow goes to the bathroom and washes her face, and when she comes back, the body is gone. Ortis tries to kill her one last time, and when he fails, he tells her that actually it wasn't his idea to kill her, and he won't tell her who gave him the order. We return to the prologue. The resurrection beast is attacking the Mithraeum. The heralds pour in, and Harrow dies. Flashback. 2 days after the events of the first book, Harrow enlisted Ianthe's help in something called the Work. Ianthe is trying to talk Harrow out of it, and then Harrow opens her eyes, revealing them to be black and gold. As a reminder, lictors take the eye color of their cavalier once their soul is fully absorbed. Harrow says that they're wasting time, and Ianthe cracks open Harrow's skull. Afterwards, she can't tell what Harrow has done, but she calls it a stupid romantic act, and out of spite, she curses Harrow's hair to grow in really quickly. And as she's leaving the room, Ianthe looks back at an unconscious Harrow, and she says, "Someday, I'm going to marry that girl." And then she goes to speak to a man about a queen. So now, let's all be confused together for a few seconds. Harrow Harknova is the Cavalier Primary of the Ninth House. She's dueling Ortis, and then she's told that there are some pilgrims there in the Bone Chapel that she needs to greet. When she gets there, Abigail says, this isn't how it happens. Harrow Harknona is competing for the hand of Her Sacred Highness, and everybody is there and holding court at this gorgeous party, but Abigail says that this still isn't how it happens. Lieutenant Harrow Harknona is a cohort member, and she's just trying to get her calf in the mess hall. And the barista is this super cute, muscular, with red hair and a crooked smile, and Abigail is a hater for ending the coffee shop AU. Harrow comes to in Cannon House, and she remembers Gideon, and she loses it remembering her. She just cries and cries and cries because she could not do this. She fundamentally could not do this. Harrow Hark intentionally blocked out the part of her brain that could comprehend Gideon in order to prevent Gideon's soul from being absorbed into her own. Harrow Hark intentionally interrupted the lictoral process by disconnecting the parts of her brain that remembered Gideon and then turning her skull into a construct so that anytime she encountered something that reminded her of Gideon, it would push on specific parts of her brain to create a false memory. Like, what the hell? Time to fix this wall. Now, you might have noticed that this is actually the first time in this entire second half of the video where I've said Gideon's name. Do you know how hard it was to write the script? Do you know how difficult it was to try and say things like the first book? It's near impossible. I had to intentionally hide everything having to do with Gideon. She's hidden under Ordis's card. And then also, I had to take down this little note here about Gideon's mom arriving in the 9th house 19 years ago. This was difficult. This took planning. So Cannon House is actually a bubble in the river, like the one that Pal has been staying in. And everybody in Cannon House are actually like the souls of the people who died in Gideon the Ninth that have been pulled into this scenario by Harrow unconsciously. Those alternate realities were the bubble changing, but Abigail stabilized it back to Cannon House because it's the easiest to work with. Harrow is being haunted by an invasive spirit, a revenant, and so Abigail needs to exorcise her. Back in Mithraeum, Gideon wakes up in Harrow's body. From this point on, everything that happens with Gideon is in the first person perspective because she's been the narrator for the entire book. She actually clarifies that she hasn't been conscious for the entire book despite narrating it. It's kind of like she floated up to the surface a few times but would keep getting pulled under. So Gideon is in Harrow's body and she is super pissed that Harrow left her alone. To Gideon, Harrow disrupted the electoral process not to preserve Gideon's soul in an act of love, but she thinks Harrow did it because she did not want Gideon's sacrifice. Harrow isn't coming back. Gideon is stuck in her body, which, by the way, has completely healed up from being stabbed through and is now rapidly healing like a lictor's body is supposed to. The heralds are pouring in, so Gideon grabs her two-hander and says, "Don't worry, honey. I'll keep the home fires burning." Everything out of Gideon's mouth, or out of her brain because she's narrating, in the next few chapters is just so good. That's all I can say. It's so good. So back in Cannon House, it's exorcism time. And everybody who's there to help is there because they want to help Harrow, including Ordis. The two of them make their peace because he says that he abandoned her when she needed him most, when she got summoned to Cannon House. So he is going to stay and fight for her now, as a 9th house cavalier is supposed to. So Harrow finds one of the notes that Gideon found in the previous book, the one that says one flesh, one end, G and P. And with that she realizes that Ordis's name, this Ordis, it isn't Ordis. Because she made her skull press on specific parts of her brain whenever she heard Gideon so that way she'd hear Ordis instead. But she hadn't accounted for the idea that there would ever be more than one Gideon. Right before the seance, Ordis concludes that Harrow was never mad. All of the notes that she's been getting about eggs and zombies and wizards was actually from the revenant that's been haunting her. Meanwhile, Gideon encounters Mercy Morn, who looks terrified to see her. At first she thinks she sees something else. And then she realizes that there's no way, because whatever she thinks that she saw could never even act human. But at that moment, Harrow has her eyes. And as a reminder, Harrow at that moment has Gideon's eyes. The amazing gold eyes. And she starts ranting about how someone knew that Gideon was on her tail. And as a side note, this is the first time that Gideon hears her name while living in Harrow's skull, and there's this weird pain, but it goes away kind of fast, which is probably because Gideon did just crack Harrow's skull in a previous scene, which probably undid the work and the self-lobotomy. Then Mercy realizes that somebody lied to her, and that Cytherea would have known the second that she looked at Gideon back at Cannon House. And she also confirms that Gideon was the lictor that was sent to kill Gideon's mother right before she got to the 9th house. Hence, Gideon, Gideon, Gideon.
Hey, Editing Susie here. I really quickly want to just step in here because I forgot to mention that Mercy Morn reveals to Gideon that she was actually the one who stabs Harrow, and that she was going to make it so nice and easy for her to die quickly, so she put her out in the hallway for the heralds to eat her and numbed her completely. And so Gideon is like immediately ready to throw down because she's being super protective of Harrow in this scene. So forgot to put that in. Back to the video.
Mercy goes to attack Gideon, and then she's shot by Cytherea. Okay, and then she just leaves. Cytherea just leaves with her gun. And Gideon just asks, what the fuck is going on? And honestly, like, same. Marta, Abigail, Magnus, Dulcie, Protesalius, Ortis, and Harrow all start the exorcism. And Abigail notes that even if they're successful with defeating this revenant in the river, they're still going to have to deal with the physical world part of her. So they do this exorcism, and the sleeper shows up, and she has like an infinite amount of guns, and she just starts like mowing everybody down. And she tells Harrow that she will stop if Harrow gives her her body so that the sleeper can finish whatever it is that she started. And then Ortis clears his throat. Let's pause on that cliffhanger for a minute so we can see what's going on back at the Mithraeum, aka my favorite chapter ever written. Gideon finds Ianthe, who for a second is so delighted to see that Harrow is alive, and she goes, Harry, you're... And then Gideon totally fucking ruins her day and goes, alive, bitch. You know, whatever made that fall is a hater, because this is my favorite chapter ever. So Gideon and Ianthe meet, and Gideon is pissed. She is so mad at Ianthe for how she's treated Harrow over the last few months, including the fact that she could totally see Cytherea's body underneath Harrow's bed, and she just lied. And Gideon's also really mad that Ianthe put her hands on Harrow, that she made Harrow want her. Everything out of Gideon's mouth is gold. And she's down so bad for Harrow. So Gideon and Ianthe are actually like kind of hilarious together. Like they mesh really well in terms of humor. And so if they weren't like both vying for the heart of, you know, the same girl who's in love with like a frozen corpse, like I think that they would have a lot of fun as friends. So they run into Augustine, who looks at Gideon and is just as terrified as Mercy Morn before he says Mercy and then like makes a run for it. So Ianthe pulls out one of the 2 letters that's been entrusted to her, and it's revealed to say, to be given to Gideon Nav. And inside of it, Harrow has left Gideon's sunglasses and a paper that says, one flesh, one end. And instead of recognizing how stupidly romantic it is, Gideon is pissed because she just wants Harrow to appreciate her sacrifice, and all she has ever wanted Harrow to do was eat her. Ianthe is like super mean and tells Gideon that Harrow did all of this, the work, to forget her because she doesn't love her. And then Gideon is like, oh my god, I'm not doing this to make her love me. She can't love me. And she tells Ianthe about the body. And Ianthe like tries to play it like super cool and super chill and like she's not hurt at all. But Gideon calls it the fact that she totally has a crush on Harrow and is like super hurt over the fact that Harrow is in love with an ice lolly bimbo. And as for the fact that Harrow can't love her, Gideon says, you hating me always meant more than anyone else in this hot and stupid universe loving me. Because at least I had your full attention. Like, what am I supposed to do with that line? What am I supposed to do with it? So anyways, Ianthe's like, let's go and see God so that, you know, we can get Harrow her body back. And Gideon agrees. Ortis starts reciting the Noniad, which is like this ancient epic poem in the Ninth House about their legendary fighter, Matthias Nonius. As a side note, yes, I know that it could be Matthias or it could be Matthias. I'm going with Matthias. I know, don't like get all up in arms if it's the other one. So anyways, they're reciting the Noniad, and this actually like summons his spirit into the bubble. And because he was a cavalier of the Ninth House, he starts fighting for the ninth house. And this transforms the bubble into the arena of the Noniad, where guns don't work. And also the entire dialogue is in meter, like my theater kid heart loves this book so much. And Harrow's also imagining like how Gideon would see the fight and how she would comment on it, and like, I'm fine. Like, I'm so fine right now. Matthias defeats the Sleeper, and then he reveals he actually has to go and fight the Resurrection Beast because somebody that he knew is currently fighting the Resurrection Beast and he owes them a debt. So he's going, and Ortis and Marta and Protosalius all decide that they are going to go with him and also fight the Resurrection Beast. Abigail and Magnus encourage Harrow to like go back to her body and live, you know, to honor Gideon's sacrifice and to honor Gideon. And they leave to return to the river. And then when it's just Harrow and Dulcie, Dulcie says that she has something to tell Harrow. When Ianthe and Gideon find God, he's interrogating Cytherea's corpse. And it actually isn't Cytherea at all. It's Commander Wake, whose full name is Commander Awake the remembrance of these valiant dead. Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna read it. I've done like 3 takes of this. Commander, awake the remembrance of these valiant dead. Kia Hoya Kote Pai, snap back to reality. Oops, there goes gravity. So it turns out that Commander Wake is actually the Revenant that they just defeated in the river, and that this is her physical self, and that she has been piloting the corpse for the entire book. But how did she get into the corpse? Remember how one of Harrow's guidelines to herself was that the sword, you know, the two-hander, was not allowed to touch flesh or bone? You remember how the first night in the Mithram, she stabbed the corpse? Wake was formerly the commander of Blood of Eden, and they've largely gone into hiding since her death 19 years ago. And God just like wants to know how she got into the ninth house in the first place. As Gideon and Ianthe watch, Mercy Morn and Augustine enter the room, and they don't see them because they're in hiding. And it turns out that Augustine and Mercy Morn know Wake because they worked with her, because they've betrayed God to work with Blood of Eden. And then Ortis, whose name isn't actually Ortis, it's Gideon, original flavor, which is my favorite one of the bits that they use to differentiate him in the book, so that's the one I'm going to call him. I'm just calling him original flavor. Original flavor enters the room, takes the sunglasses off of Gideon's face, and then kills Cytherea / Wake all over again. And he reveals that he had chased her to the ninth house because he thought he was the father of her baby. So in this moment, Gideon realizes that Commander Wake, the leader of Blood of Eden, was her mother who fell to the ninth house 19 years ago, and the reason that she yelled Gideon, Gideon, Gideon was because Gideon was on her trail. And he thought he was Gideon's father because they were having an affair at the time, but it turns out he's not the dad because there was a scheme involved. Dios Apate. Major. Augustine and Mercy needed John's genetic material. I'm trying so hard to make sure that this doesn't get like murdered by YouTube. So they got a hold of it through Dios Apate. Major. But why did they need it? So blood wards are actually cell wards. So any child that's genetically related to John would be able to open the locked tomb with their blood. So Mercy Morn gave Commander Wake a sample of John's genetic material and a bunch of dummy ova, or, you know, eggs, so that they could get a baby and open the locked tomb. But the eggs that Mercy gave her all died. She lied to her about it, so Wake instead carried the baby herself. The notes that Harrow has been reading the entire book are actually notes from the Revenant, Commander Wake, ranting about the failure of the Ninth House operation, aka Operation Kill God's Baby to open the locked tomb. Gideon is John's baby, and in what is perhaps the greatest one-liner of the book, she steps out of the hiding spot that she's been in for this entire scene and she says, "I'm not fucking dead." And John says, "Hi, not fucking dead. I'm Dad."
It's me again, editing. Real quickly, just want to explain, because I can't believe that I didn't put this in the script. The lictors want a baby that's genetically, related to God so that they can use its blood to get into the locked tomb, getting around the blood ward, right? So earlier I said that John says there's no way Harrow could have gotten into the locked tomb. But even earlier I mentioned that on the day that Harrow got into the locked tomb, she and Gideon got into this insane fight where Gideon got her face completely scratched up by Harrow. When Harrow goes to open the locked tomb, she has Gideon's blood under her fingernails and she is able to get through the blood ward. She did get into the locked tomb. She has seen it before. Anyways, back to the video.
So Mercy and Augustine actually have some questions for John about his power. As they interrogate him, we learn that Ael's name is actually Alecto. She was some sort of monster in the shape of a human. They originally assumed that John was just not able to kill her, and that the best he could do was put her into an indefinite sleep in the locked tomb. But actually, John couldn't kill her because she's where he gets all of his power from. Now, they have no clue why a child on the Ninth House would have Alecto's eyes, considering that, she probably didn't have a genetic code to begin with because, again, she wasn't human. But they know why there would be a child born in the Ninth House that would have John's eyes, because they worked very hard to make sure that his genetic material ended up in a baby on the Ninth House. John's eyes are originally gold because he swapped them with Alecto, because he was her necromancer. John's super freaky, all black eyes are actually Alecto's, and the gold eyes that Alecto has that had been haunting everybody, those are actually John's, because she was his cavalier and they found a way to complete lictorhood without Alecto having to die. And John lied to all of the other lictors. He let them murder their friends and their family, and he said nothing about how there was a way to do it without needing them to die. At this point, Ianthe emerges from the hiding spot, and her face gives nothing away. Cards close to her chest. Mercy murders God as vengeance for what he did to Christabel and all of the other Cavaliers. And then she and Augustine decide that they are going to make a run for it, and they're going to meet up with BOE, and they're going to fulfill something called the Promise, and they are going to make a world without necromancy. As a side note, we still don't know what the hell the Promise is. And as they're planning this, Augustine says, "Oh, we'll still hate each other, my dear. We've hated each other too long and too passionately to stop. But my bones will rest easy next to your bones." Anyways, John's not dead. He completely reassembles himself, and then he murders Mercy Morn by disintegrating her. So it's not that John, he can't die. He, cannot die. Not even resurrection beasts can kill him, and he's just been pretending that they could for the last 10,000 years. So John makes everybody choose their loyalty. Original Flavor picks John. Ianthe picked John. He does not make Gideon choose because, that's his daughter, and she's in Harrow's body, and he doesn't feel right about, punishing Harrow for something that, she's not even here for. And during this part, he reveals that he was the one who gave Original Flavor the order to try and kill Harrow all those times, so now Gideon hates him. Augustine doesn't choose John. He chooses violence, and he plunges the Mithraeum into the river as the resurrection beast descends. Original Flavor helps Gideon escape to a non-submerged part of Mithraeum and reveals that it's actually not Original Flavor, it's his cavalier, PRE-NONA. So it turns out that she and Original Flavor have a similar situation going on to Gideon and Harrow, except Original Flavor took a little bit more in the deal. But he just died fighting the resurrection beast, so Mom says it's Purah's turn with the body. Oh, and it turns out that both of them were having an affair with Wake. Hence that note about the love triangle with two people burning in hell. John is like nearly devoured by the stoma because they think he's a resurrection beast. And he's taking Augustine down with him, and Ianthe swims up, and she can only save one of them, and she chooses John. Augustine is devoured by the stoma and goes to hell. Gideon goes into the river, and as she's drowning and succumbing to like the pressure of the river, her mind like meshes with Harrow's, and she like feels at peace with the whole thing. And then she's pulled out of the river by Harrow's dead girlfriend, Alecto. And in the wrong voice, twice removed, Alecto directs somebody to begin chest compressions. In that moment, they die. Dulcie has revealed to Harrow that Gideon is piloting her body back outside of the river, meaning that Harrow now knows that Gideon is alive. So, instead of choosing to go back to her body, she goes into the river and she emerges in the locked tomb. The coffin is empty except for a two-hander and a copy of Frontline Titties of the Fifth, one of Gideon's favorite publications, which Harrow claims is not a real publication. Harrow crawls into the coffin and she sleeps. But please note that the book specifically says, lying in the tomb that had claimed her heart, far away in a land she had never traveled. So there's a lot of speculation about where Harrow actually is. The epilogue takes place 6 months later. The narrator, who we now know is Nona, again, that is the singular spoiler, is that the narrator in the epilogue is Nona, is living with 3 people who take care of her and they teach her. She heals super quickly. They're in some sort of city with a war going on, and she's trained with bones and with exercise. And she asks one of her caretakers if they have figured out who she is yet. And Camilla Hecht, with Palamedes Sextus's eyes looking out of her skull, says, not yet. End of Harrow. Oh my god. all I can say is like, oh my god. This is my favorite book ever. Like, I could read this book a million times. I will never get sick of it. I could talk about this book for a million years, and I could never get sick of it. But I could record a video that goes on for several hours and gives me so many technical difficulties, and I might be sick of it a little bit, but oh my god. When I read this for the first time in the summer of 2020, it became my entire personality. It became my entire life. My camera died again. I am so close to the finish line, and the camera died again. So I'm going to summarize As Yet Unsent just super quickly. Alright? Blood of Eden got to Cannon House before John did, and they picked up Judith, Coronabeth, and Camilla. They hate Judith because she's a necromancer, and Blood of Eden is super anti-necromancer, so like they're not helping her heal super well, and Camilla is just like doing her best. But Mercy Morn actually enters in the middle of the book to like communicate with Blood of Eden, and she heals Judith. She's super fine. Turns out Blood of Eden has a stele, which is like this obelisk that when it's bathed with like oxygenated blood, it's able to teleport ships and people all the way across the universe, and it's like a really big deal that Blood of Eden now has one. Coronabeth asks Judith if, you know, she'll take Coronabeth on as her cavalier because I don't know. Coronabeth is like really good with the sword. Remember, she dueled Gideon and she actually held her own. And it's revealed that Judith Jorritos has been in love with Coronabeth Tridentarius for years. Also, Blood of Eden has Gideon's body. And it's not rotting. And that is the locked tomb thus far. When I originally planned this video, I thought maybe I'm going to talk about like everything that we've gotten from Nona so far, and maybe I'm going to say my Nona theories. And this has turned out to be much longer than I thought it was going to be, and much more stressful than I thought it was going to be. So I don't know, like maybe if I have the energy, I'll make a video in the next month that's like all of my like, you know, Nona predictions and my Nona theories, because I have a lot of theories. And some of the strings of my theories were mentioned as like one-off things in this recap, and I'm just not going to be able to expand upon them. But that's just the way that it goes. Thank you for watching if you've made it this far. You can follow me on Twitter if you want, at Susie L. Books. And yeah, again, just thanks for sticking around. And I am really looking forward to Nona. But more than anything, I am looking forward to getting some sleep tonight. It is past midnight, so again, just thanks.